Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Aguna, facilitating divorce processes for women with Rabbi Haim Ovadia. Rabbi Haim Ovadia, born and raised in Jerusalem, was shaped by strong Zionist ideals and a rich Sephardic rabbinic tradition that values Tanakh, Hebrew poetry, and the sciences alongside the study of Talmud and Halakha, and promotes a humane, inclusive approach to Judaism. He was ordained by Chief Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, studied Talmud at Bar-Ilan University, and earned an MA in Hebrew literature from UCLA. Over more than 30 years, he has served as a community rabbi in diverse communities across Israel, South America, and both coasts of the United States, and has been a faculty member at the Academy for Jewish Religion of California since 2002. Alongside his rabbinic leadership, he has been active in social advocacy, promoting inclusion and practical, empowering halakhic solutions, and has reached thousands worldwide through teaching, podcasts, YouTube, and distance learning. He is currently teaching at Ramaz High School in Manhattan. Thank you so much, Rabbi Ovadia. This is the second of 3 classes that we have set up with you, so it's great to have you back for this fascinating topic. Feel free to take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, everyone. Those who are joining live and those who are joining online later. Today's topic is the issue of Aguna. It's a painful issue, still unresolved, and I want to present the very simple solution that is really at hand, and explain also why we're not using it. So, as you know, Aguna is a woman whose husband refuses to give her a get. She depends, according to Torah law, the woman depends on her husband to give her the get, and if he refuses, she's basically tied to him. She cannot remarry, but even if she doesn't want to remarry, it's not only about marriage, it's about not being bound to a person that she doesn't want to live with. And that's a point that unfortunately is being ignored in many cases. Another point of imbalance is that if the husband wishes to remarry, he could get something called heter rabbanim. If 100 rabbis or several rabbis will sign a special document with him, for him, he will be able to marry, even though the get has not been given yet, and that is not an option that the woman has. So I want to examine through one halakha what could be done about Aguna and why it's not done. So the statement in the Talmud regarding Aguna, there's an interesting statement. This is in Masechet Shabbat 145:2. The Talmud says, "En ed mipi ed kasher ela be'edut isha bilvad." Hearsay, meaning one witness heard from another, is valid only as a testimony for a woman. What does it mean, testimony for a woman? That Rashi explains, le'edut isha, a testimony for a woman, lomar liisha met ba'alich, de'akilu barabanan mishum iguna, like if a woman is waiting for news to know whether her husband is alive or not, and one witness comes and he says, I heard from someone else that your husband died. That's called hearsay. That's ed mipi ed. That person did not witness. He has no testimony, that he has no evidence that the person has died. He says, I've heard so. So Rashi says, to tell a woman your husband has died, a witness who heard another witness, this is accepted. Why? The rabbis were lenient because of anchoring of Aguna. The literal meaning of Aguna comes from the word ogen, which is the anchor of the ship. So a woman who cannot get a divorce is basically anchored to her husband. She's anchored to her husband, and this is a limiting situation. So Rashi says, anyone who marries a woman does so with the consent of the rabbis in mind. And in this case, the rabbis annulled his marriage. So if you've ever heard of nullification of marriage retroactively, here Rashi says it very blatantly. Rashi says that, in a sense, when we accept the evidence, the testimony of one witness as a hearsay, we're not really relying on the evidence. The testimony, the edut, is only a crutch, a support that allows us to nullify the marriage, because this line, anyone who marries a woman does so with the consent of the rabbis in mind, meaning that the marriage is valid only as long as it has the approval of the rabbinical establishment. If the rabbinical establishment says we do not approve of that marriage for whatever reason, then the marriage is null and void. And this woman is considered as someone who's never married before. She can even marry a Kohen. She's not considered a divorced woman. No, there's no impact on her status. Her children are kosher children. Not a problem at all. And she was never married, basically. So that's what Rashi says. The reason, going back to the previous slide, if we ask why are the rules relaxed for the testimony of Aguna, Rashi says we don't want a woman to be in a situation of Aguna. We don't want her to be anchored or chained to the husband. So let's see what the other Mefarshim say. This is the Tosafot. Rabbeinu Yitzhak, one of the elders of the authors of Tosafot in the 12th and 13th century, says, "Mitakanat hachamim hu dene'eman, ve'en ze akirat davar min haTorah, kivan shedome hadavar hagun leha'amin, shedabar yesh k'sar ta'am musmach, ve'lo hashiv oker davar min haTorah." He says, it is a rabbinical decree to rely on one witness. Now, if you will ask, Rabbeinu Yitzhak said, is it not uprooting a biblical concept? According to the Torah, you always require two witnesses for every halakhic decisions, for every judicial case in court. You always need two witnesses. How can the rabbis come and say, in this case, we only require one witness, or hearsay? So Rabbeinu Yitzhak says, because the matter seems to be worthy of believing it. In a case where there is some logical reason to rely on it, it is not considered uprooting a biblical concept. Now, as I commented here, this is very strange. So why do we need the two witnesses to begin with? Where is that line? In the Hebrew, it says "Domea davar ve'agun le'amin." It makes sense. It seems that this if this testimony was not true, the person would not come to court to present that testimony. So the question is, in that case, how do we draw the line between testimony that is that should be accepted and one that should not be accepted? Why wouldn't I say that whenever the court feels that this case is a case where we could rely on the testimony of one witness, that will be okay? There's no clear distinction between the case of an anchored woman of an aguna and all other cases. That is a problem that we have at hand. So Rashi basically says we annul the marriage, and we use the testimony just as a pretext or as an excuse or support to allow us to do that. Whereas the Tosfot say karov hadavar ve'agun le'amin. This is like a case where we feel like it is okay to rely on the edut of one witness. Let's see what other commentary we have on that. The Maharsha, Rabbi Shmuel Isalis, raises the question on that, and he says, this is hard to accept. How can they be lenient regarding a married woman and allow the uprooting of a biblical prohibition? It says it's called akor davar min haTorah. Why? The Torah demands drisha v'hakira, a cross-examination of two witnesses. The Maharsha, who comes later in the 16th century, does not accept the argument of the Tosfot. It says it's very hard to accept that. So where does it really stem from? This is the question that we have. So let's see what Rambam says. It's going back in time to before the Tosfot, and Rambam is usually very, very logical, very clear in his halakhic argumentation. And Rambam says the following: "Davar she'efshar la'amod al buryo, shelo mipi ha'ed hazeh." Something that could be clarified or verified. Sorry, I went back. Yeah. Davar she'efshar la'amod al buryo, shelo mipi ha'ed hazeh. It's a matter that can be verified in manners other than this one witness. Ve'en ha'ed yachol leishamet imena devar emet. The witness cannot cannot provide excuses for his lie. Kigon ze she'ait shemet ploni, like he testifies that a certain person died. Lo ikpid the Torah alav. The Torah here does not insist to have two witnesses because it's highly improbable that the witness will lie. What is the argument of Rambam? Basically, he says if the husband were alive, right, the witness would not dare and lie to say that the husband is dead, because then eventually that lie uh, would have come out. People would find out that this whole thing was a hoax, and the witness is lying, and because this could be verified by means other than this one witness, then in this case the Torah did not insist on having two witnesses. What is missing here? Two things are missing here. Like we wrote in the comment at the bottom of the page, there are two things are missing here. One is that what if the husband wants to disappear? He wants to escape for whatever reason. Maybe the ketubah is too much for him to pay. Maybe he doesn't want to give his wife a divorce forever, or for whatever reason, he wants to get out of this entanglement for him, which for him is the marriage. He never wants to come back to town. And he agreed with that. He made a deal with that witness. You go and testify that I'm dead. This way, they're not going to look for me. I'm going to move to another country. And we know that back in the day, when we're not talking about times where you had where we had internet, or um, uh, the ability to identify people by cameras everywhere. Someone could just, even today, people could disappear anywhere in the world, and even more so at that time. So how do we know that this husband did not decide to disappear and told the witness, "I'll pay you whatever sum, just go and testify that I'm dead"? There's no proof for that. Besides that, Rambam says that in such a case, the Torah did not insist on having two witnesses. That's a very that's a claim that usually you would want to bring a proof for, especially someone like Rambam, who always seeks the truth and always being very logical. To say lo ikpida Torah alav, the Torah did not require in this case bringing having two witnesses. What is your source? Where does it say in the Torah? Right, read throughout the Torah everywhere the Torah discusses the issue of witnesses. The Torah says al pi shnayim edim or al pi shlosha edim yakum davar. In order to establish a certain concept in bedin, in rabbinical court, you have to have two or three witnesses. The Torah never says that you could rely on one witness. The Torah never says that if one in the case of a woman, for example, like the case that we have here, you could rely on one witness alone. So Rambam again does not make a clear argument of why would rely on one witness, right? He just says it's davar shefshar lamod al biru. At one point, this thing will come out, and then he does not provide the biblical source to say that the Torah doesn't care that much about providing two witnesses in this case. So now, let's see. Next. Okay. The Rabbi Avraham Moshe Diboton, who's the commentator on the Rambam, wrote a commentary called Merkevet HaMishneh, says this: Lo ikpida Torah shelo na'akor mimena. It's like, you see how, what I want to show, by the way, with all these texts, is how the commentators struggle with the statement of the Gemara. What Rashi explained so clearly and so, like I said before, blatantly, basically, we're annul the marriage. All the other commentators who tried to say that this is actually an act that followed due process. This is the difference between Rashi and the other two commentators. Rashi says we don't follow due process. This is something which is extrajudicial. We do not rely on witnesses. This kind of testimony is not acceptable. But because we feel that the woman is in a tight place, because we don't want her to be anchored, we are nullifying the marriage. This is an extrajudicial step. The other commentators, Tosafot and Rambam, try to keep it within the judicial system, within the judicial framework, and to say we are here relying on witnesses, but we have an exception. In this case, we have an exception which allows us to rely on one witness alone. And each generation, Tosafot and the Maharsha, who comments on them, the Rambam and Merkavet HaMishneh, who comments on Rambam, they all struggle with how can you fit that concept into the judicial system. So what does the Merkavet HaMishneh, Rabbi Avraham Diboton says? לא הקפיד התורה שלא נעקור ממנה, אלא בדבר שאינו עשוי להיגלות. Is it true? In a way, he says it's true that we were not allowed to uproot a biblical concept, but we can only not do that. I mean, the prohibition of the Torah of do not uproot a biblical concept is only b'davar she'eno asur ligalot, when the truth is not likely to be revealed. Aval b'davar asur ligalot, but if the truth could be revealed, even though the Torah requires two witnesses, however, if we uproot it, the Torah doesn't care about uprooting it. Whether because because this is something that is worthy of being to be believed, like the Tosafot said. So, if you notice, and since I know we don't have that many people on right now on live, so I'm saying if you notice later on when you listen to this recording and you go through this and look at the text, ask yourself this question: what is the author of Merkavet HaMishneh? What does he add on what Rambam says? He doesn't add much. He just writes it with in a more flowery language or more roundabout way. Says yes, we are not allowed to uproot anything of the Torah, and the Torah doesn't want us to do that. But if the eventual development will show that what we did was right, the Torah says it's fine if you uprooted it at point A in time, because at point B in time, it will reveal that you were right. So, for example, here, if the witness came and said the husband is dead, and then in the next 50 years the husband never shows up, then everybody knows, oh, he was right. The husband was really dead, right? That's the davar she'eno asur leigalot. Because if the witness would have known that the husband would show up, he would not say that. Again, the Merkavet HaMishneh, the rabbi here, doesn't provide any argument, because the lack of evidence is not evidence. Meaning, the fact, let's say that the witness came and said, her husband is dead. We have one witness, right? And the husband never showed up. Till the end of her life, that woman got remarried, had children with her second husband. Everything is beautiful, nice and dandy. And then the husband never showed up. No one ever challenged that ruling that the husband is dead and she's a widow, right? But what if the husband is alive? He just didn't show up. Does that make her not a married woman? She's still a married woman. A married woman who got married again to someone else. And in this case, the children are mamzerim. So whatever the Merkavet HaMishneh says doesn't really hold water in terms of a halakhic argument. And I feel that the Maharam Diboton, Rabbi Avraham Moshe Diboton, felt that his argument is not strong enough. And he says, Zenir Ali, if you see here at the end, it says, Zenir Ali leyashev da'at Rabbeinu. This is how I can explain the approach of Maimonides. V'ha'el yitbarach yatzilenu mishgiot. May Hashem save us from errors, meaning that he feels that this is walking a very fine line, and that could lead to errors. So this is what Maharam Diboton, Rabbi Moshe Diboton, says on the opinion of Maimonides. So now, when we'll look at if we summarize those three opinions, what do we have so far? The Talmud says that we are lenient when considering testimony for an Aguna. The Talmud says that we have that when we consider testimony for an aguna, we are lenient. But that leniency means that we are willing to accept a witness, even though in all other cases that testimony is invalid. But we will accept it in order to unchain the woman from that anchor of the aguna. So Rashi says, though we collect evidence, in essence, we rely on the retroactive annulment of marriage. This is what I said before, summarizing it, that Rashi does not try to squeeze this halacha into the judicial process. He sees it as extrajudicial. This is like a step, an extreme step. We nullify the marriage. This is a word that, a term, if you're familiar with the issue of aguna, that is sort of like today is considered like the doomsday weapon, right? Nullification of marriage. Any rabbi who discussed this issue, any rabbi who argued for that issue and said that we should use nullification of marriage is being attacked by, if you do that, every woman will file for a nullification of her marriage, and the establishment of marriage will be destroyed. Not true. If we stop right here and we think of that, had the rabbis accepted, let's say, that halakha that Rashi mentions, and the Batei Din of today would use it in every case of aguna, very quickly there would be no more agunot, because if the husband comes to Bedin, he knows that he has the weapon of holding the get back from his wife. And since he's the only one who's allowed to give the get, there's no other way to bypass him. He has all the power. But if the Bedin can bypass him and nullify the marriage, then okay, maybe the Bedin will have to do it in one or two cases. But after that is done, the other husband, the other case will say, okay, I have no power here. I'd rather just go with the system and give the get to my wife, and that's it. It's done. But that's what Rashi says. The Tosafot say something that I said before does not make sense logically. They say there is a higher probability that the witness is telling the truth. This is like saying I'm relying on, by Torah standards, right? I rely on circumstantial evidence. The Torah does not accept circumstantial evidence. If you really want to adhere to Din Torah, you have to say, okay, as long as I don't have two witnesses, nothing is done. Maimonides maybe adds an element. He says a witness is not likely to lie about the husband's death, because if the husband is alive and he comes later to court, the witness will be punished as a false witness. Again, it just deepens a little bit what the Tosafot say, but it's not enough, because what if the husband and the witness know of one another, and the husband already decided that he's never going to come to Bedin, is never going to show up. So let's move on. This discussion is a lot of text. It's all legal text, and I hope that everybody will follow that. Much later, Rabbi Amram Bloom of Hungary, in his Shut Bet Sharim, Shut is the Shelot Utshuvot, and we're going to look at Shelot Utshuvot later. I just want to say that the sources that I'm using today, some of them come from the Talmud and commentaries. Some come from the codifiers like Rambam, who wrote a codex of Jewish law, and some of them come from responsa. The responsa is important in general when we study halakha, because we can see the halakha in context. Here, I picked up like one line or two lines out of context, but the next case, the main case that I would want to discuss, we will see in context. The importance of seeing the halakhic discussion in context is to understand what is the posek, what is the decisor, the person who writes the halakha, what is his thinking process, what is the case that is being placed in front of him, what are the arguments that he presents, what are the difficulties that he faces, when and where did he live. All these things are things that we could see in the responsa literature. Responsa literally means, not literally, this is the term that was coined for the literature of she'elot u'tshuvot, questions that are sent to rabbis, and the rabbis provide answers in writing. In many cases, the rabbis would make a copy and keep the tshuva for themselves, and later on publish it, because it's a halakhic work that is important. So in this responsum, the Rabbi Amram Blum says the following: כיוון שהדבר הגון להאמין, אם כן באמת אינה אשת איש, ואין כאן איסור בבעילתה, רק דיש גזירת הכתוב לבעינן משפטי העדות. This really is taking the, I would say, intellectual analysis to an extreme in a way that almost distorts reality or distorts the laws of the Torah. How so? Rabbi Blum says the following: Hadavar hagun le'amid, says following the Tosfot and Rambam, who says that this testimony of the witness that the husband died has a high probability. It's highly probable that the husband is indeed dead. Im ken be'emet, and actually is that she's not a married woman. Again, since it's probable that what he's saying is true, right? So if we rely on that, she's not a married woman, and sleeping with her is not prohibited. There's no sexual prohibition. It's not incest. רק דיש גזירת הכתוב דבעינן משפטי העדות, but there is a biblical decree, with no reason, that we need due process. משפטי העדות is due process, the laws of testimony. וחכמים הקילו משום עגונה דלא בעי דיני העדות. And the rabbis, the only leniency of the rabbis is to lift the requirement for due process. וזה הווה עקירה רק בשב ואל תעשה. And that is only uprooting the mitzvah, right, passively and not actively. See what Rabbi Blum did here. Remember that I said this. The discussion here is about due process. Are we having the clear judicial process, or are we doing something which is extrajudicial? So Rabbi Blum says there are two issues here. There's the issue of marital connections or marital contract, and there's the issue of due process. To go against the Torah and to say that she's not married, we're not allowed. But to say the Torah required two witnesses and I will not require two witnesses is like shev ve'al taseh. I'm being passive by waiving the need for two witnesses. I'm not actively breaking the laws of the Torah. What are you going to do with the fact that she's a married woman? You will say, it's very probable that she's not a married woman because we have one witness. So this is a circular argument because you cannot believe that thing unless you have two witnesses. We cannot separate the requirement for having two witnesses from the status of her marital status. It's like saying, let's say if I take this concept and I apply it to a case of burglary, right? A house was broken into, and we suspect a certain person because that person is known to always be involved in crimes, right? We have no evidence against him. There's nothing in his possession. Nobody saw him that night at that house or anything like that. But the police says it's highly probable that he is the culprit, right? But the judge will say, but you're missing two witnesses. You need two witnesses to indict the person. They say, okay, so we're not doing anything wrong. We're just waiving the need for two witnesses. And that's just a passive act of not imposing the laws of the Torah that require witnesses. But other than that, it's probably him who did it. Would that make sense? Is this an argument that makes sense? We're basically bypassing the requirement of the Torah to have two witnesses. So far we see that the Gemara, the Talmud made a simple statement, Rashi made a simple explanation, but that it is not due process, that we are doing something that's outside the judicial framework. We nullify the marriage. Nullification of the marriage is not part of the judicial system of interviewing or investigating witnesses. It is a part of a different system, that of the authority of the rabbis, to establish one's status as married or non-married. And since when one does the kiddushin, the words we say "Aret mekudeshet li betabarat zo kedat Moshe v'Yisrael," according to the laws of Moshe and Israel, it means that the husband says that our consent, our marital status depends on the consent of the rabbis, and the rabbis agree that we are doing it halachically, we're doing it in a kosher way, and therefore our marriage is valid. If the rabbis come and say, sorry, we looked at your marriage and we decided that it's invalid for whatever reason, then this marriage would be invalid. And those are things that can happen today, right? Let's say let's say there's a dispute regarding a purchase of a house, right? The one side says I bought the house, the other side says I didn't sell you the house. I want to cancel the deal. What are we going to do? We're going to bring. There could be witnesses to say if there's no contract, it's an oral transaction, then we'll have to bring witnesses. Back in the day, that's how it was. Not always you had contracts, even for real estate. But if there was a contract, bring the contract and see what's written there. And if the court says it could be something trivial, the court says, okay, your name is, let's say in my case, your last name is Ovadia, right? And usually spell it Ovadia, but in the contract it is spelled Ovadya. And even though it sounds the same, it's not the same person. And we decide that because of that, your contract is null and void, right? Because according to our laws, you have to spell your name in the contract exactly how it's spelled in all other documents, and that's a normal requirement, right? In the civil court, in certain things, your papers, your ID, your social security number, everything has to carry the same. People could get out of trouble in a way if the spelling of the name is incorrect, unless there's another way to prove their identity. So in this case, what Rashi suggests is that the rabbis come and say, for whatever reason, we decide that your marriage was not valid. Question is really, I think at that point, I'm leaving the slides here for a second. The question is, what prompts the rabbis to say that the marriage is null and void? Why would they say that? Right? So I think that Rashi hints to that. If I go back to and actually this is maybe we could say even it is contained in the very name, the very term that the rabbis use for a woman who cannot get a divorce. We call her Aguna. She is anchored. So the rabbi said, oh, we nullified the marriage. The marriage were not valid because the woman, upon marriage, did not agree to be Aguna in the future. And that is, by the way, it's a clause if you know of the clauses that are included in marriage and prenuptial agreement, and to be able to get a divorce in case of trouble. This is the clause that we rely on to say, had the bride known at the time of the marriage that if problems arise, she will be stuck in a marriage where she can never get out, she can never get a divorce, she would never get married. The consent was in error. In a way, this is what Rashi is maybe alluding to. But I'll go to the next question, right? So, like I say, from the three commentaries I mentioned above, that of Rashi is the only logical one, right? Because it explains how the rabbis can operate against biblical standards. So, in a sense, Rashi says they're not operating against biblical standards. This is the power given to the rabbis. They are the ones who decide which marriage is valid, which marriage is not valid. So now is my question: if annulment of marriage is a viable tool, why is it not used more often? Right? Why is it if it's easily available, and Rashi says that this is something that we use? Why don't we use it more often? What is the great fear of the rabbis of doing that? Because it's clear, at least from that statement in the Talmud and from Rashi, that if you do that, if the Beit Din convenes and says, this marriage is null and void. They have the power to do it, and the woman is not a married woman, and she can marry anyone she wants. Uh, Also, an important thing that we have to keep in mind, as I wrote here, is that the reliance on annulment of marriage is not a post facto concept. It's not that uh, we say, okay, go get married. We assume that your husband is dead, and then what happens if he shows up? Oh, if he shows up, we're going to nullify your marriage. It doesn't work that way, because then it will mean that when she got married and the nullification of marriage has not been activated yet, she was still married to another person. So that is something that has to be included in the verdict after we collect the evidence, the testimony of one witness. We already decided that her marriage is null and void. So this is a tool that the rabbis use at the time of the verdict. So the question remains: why is this solution not used also uh, in cases of husbands who refuse to give their wives a Jewish religious divorce, causing them tremendous emotional and mental pain? Meaning, if you search the halakhic literature, you'll find out that usually the consideration for agunot, the woman who is considered aguna, there are two types of aguna. One is aguna whose husband is missing, and there were many cases like that after unfortunately the war, the Shoah, and the wars in Israel, and the Twin Towers. Missing husband, you don't know whether the husband is dead or alive, and this is one category. The other category is when the husband is alive but he refuses to give a get. And usually, when the husband is missing, the rabbis are more uh, willing to deal with the aguna. They never say openly, "We nullify marriage," but they would accept any type of evidence, circumstantial evidence, DNA, obviously, that would not be accepted in a biblical, in a Torah, the Oraita court. They accept the testimony of a woman, of one witness, and even that of what is called gazlan, or robber, a known criminal whom you wouldn't rely on for any other testimony, could testify for a missing husband to say that man is dead. But none of that would be used for the husband who's present. Obviously we don't look for an evidence the husband is dead, but if we know that um, that when we okay, let's go back. If I have one witness or a woman, according to the classical Doraita approach, the way we understand the Torah law, a woman is not a valid witness. One witness is not a valid witness. But even worse than the one witness is the robber or the thief, because one witness, at least, if I had another witness, then both of them would be valid. But if the witness is a robber or a thief or a criminal, even if he finds another witness who testifies exactly like him, they'll be considered like one witness, because the gazlan, the thief, is not here, and yet we rely on them. And like Rashi said, we don't really rely on them. We rely on the nullification of marriage. So why don't we use the same tool of nullification of marriage for missing husbands? So here we have a responsa from modern times that sheds light on that issue. And this is a teshuvah by Rabbi Wozner. Rabbi Shmuel Wozner was considered one of the greatest halakhic authorities of the 20th century. He passed away maybe 10 years ago at the age of 103. He was the leader of what is called Huk Hatam Sofer in Israel. Those are the followers of the Hatam Sofer from Pressburg, sort of a Hasidic dynasty, which is also very deeply rooted in Halakha and Talmud. And here he brings this really shocking case. Nidon shekatav kevodo. Your Honor, wrote me a letter about this issue. The woman got married to a certain man, in the camp, the displaced persons camp after the Shoah in Salzburg, in Austria. ונסעו לצ'ילה, in South America, וילדה לו בן. ולא רצה למולו, ואשתו רצתה. So he refuses to circumcise the son, but his wife wants to circumcise, to do bris milah for the baby. ולאחר 3 שנים נולד הבן השני, and then the second son arrives. ואז אמר לה בפירוש שהוא נשתמד עוד לפני שנים כאשר היה במחנה הממשלה. And then the husband says, years ago when we were in the DP camp, I converted to Christianity. And that happened to a lot of Jews following the Shoah because they felt so traumatized, hunted down, persecuted, tortured for being Jews. People chose Christianity over Judaism. So, and he says he didn't tell her that at the time because he knew that if he would have told her, she wouldn't marry him. And now he says, וכעת אמר לה שבשום אופן לא ימול את בניו, שאין לו שייכות עם עם ישראל. I have no connections with Am Yisrael. I don't want to do Brit Milah. והאישה בשומעה זאת עזבה אותו. And when his wife heard that, she was shocked. She left him. ובעלה אין רצונו ליתן לה גט, ונתפרדו רק על ידי הממשלה. And her husband does not want to give her a get. And their separation was only in civil court, and not in Jewish court. וכעת ביקשה האישה ליתן לה היתר להינשא, and the woman is asking for a permission to get remarried. ולנתק אותה מבעלה, אשר בא במרמה עליה בכל עת. That last line is very important. Because the posek, first of all, describes the whole story. This is post-Shoah. This is people who were traumatized by the Holocaust, got married in a camp in Austria, went to Chile. They have children. They have a family. The woman believes that she's part of a religious family. Now she realizes that not only her husband is not religious or observant, he abandoned Judaism and became a Christian. And only now he tells her. He refuses to give her a get. There's no way they could get out of this marriage. And now she wants a permission to get married, to disconnect her, to detach her from her husband. He deceived her and violated her. She feels violated to think that the person that she was so intimate with is someone who goes against everything that she believes in. That's not something that she wants. She's a deep emotional pain. She doesn't do it because she wants to have a good life with another person. She cannot tolerate the thought that she is connected to that person. And also, another telling statement here is that when they got married, lo amar la klum mizeh, he didn't tell her anything about his conversion to Christianity, since he knew that if he would have told her, she would not marry him. What would you think the rabbi would do here? Rabbi Wasner. So I did not bring this text here. I had to mention it that in another place, this whole discussion that I had from the beginning about what Rashi says, what Tosfot says, this is actually appears in a different Teshuvah of Rabbi Wasner. He himself says that any time that we allow a woman to get married based on the testimony of one witness or a woman or hearsay, we rely on that safety blanket of Rashi, that of the nullification of the marriage. In other words, when discussing husbands who disappeared, Rabbi Wasner says, we tell people, we write in our psak din, in our verdict, that we rely on that testimony, but testimony is invalid. We really rely on the nullification of the marriage. So since he himself said it, you would have thought that in this very, very tragic case, right, that is a perfect place to apply that method, right, to use that tool and to nullify the marriage of that crook, of that person who deceived his wife and did not tell her that he converted to Christianity, and which she's deeply, deeply appalled by and traumatized by. But what does Rav Wozner says? And here we have the answer of why the rabbis are not using that tool of aguna, of a bitul, of nullification of kiddushin. He says, "V'harei al zeh," he says, I refuse to do it. I will not nullify her marriage. Why? הרי על זה מצפים החילונים פורקי עול שבעמנו, שימצא דרך לבטל אישות בלי גט חס ושלום. וכל כולה בנידונים כאלה מחזק המעשה הדת, בנותן חרב בידם, ומכל שכון בחזה, שאין מקום להקל כלל. First of all, with the arguments that he didn't bring here, he says, it is impossible that she didn't know that he's Christian. In other words, says, I don't really believe what she's saying. She probably knew it in advance, and now she doesn't like him, and now okay, put all this aside. All the other things are aside. This is the real argument. He says, this is exactly what the secular heretics are waiting for, to find a way to annul matrimonial obligations without a divorce, God forbid. In other words, it's not about halakha. It's about politics. It's about what will people say. If we allow that, then the secular heretics will say, "Oh, you could undo marriage without a get. So why do we need the rabbinical system? Why do we need rabbinical courts? Right? We could just go and nullify that." And to allow a widow to marry without performing the levirate law, according to the Torah, if she had no children, she has to marry her brother-in-law or do halitza. It says any lenient ruling on these issues supports those who want to destroy religions and puts a sword in their hands. You give them a weapon to fight against us, therefore one should not be lenient at all in such a case. Here in the Hebrew it says, and like even more so, we cannot do that. So if we review what was said so far, and again, I know there's many halakhic sources and a lot of arguments that we have to really maybe study more in depth and see. And this is a very short and brief introduction, but it's worth to look at the text. I shared them with Uri Letzedek, and they will share with anyone who's interested. We see that there is a way to nullify marriage, and according to Rashi, it is used anytime we don't have sufficient testimony that the husband died. But this ammunition is reserved only for the case where the husband is missing, and not with the case where a husband refuses to give a get, and not just, and even in extreme cases where the husband who's present is not someone who has a fight with his wife and refuses to give her a get. Someone like this case that Rabbi Wozner discusses, someone who converted to Christianity, who's antagonistic and with whom the woman feels violated, still we don't do it. Why is that happening? We could see that by looking at the words of Rabbi Avraham Binyamin Sofer, the son of the Hatam Sofer, from whose lineage Rabbi Wozner comes. כל שנראה להמון כעקירת דבר מן התורה, אין בכוח חכמים, שנראה כעוקר דבר מן התורה. The rabbis felt comfortable to nullify marriage as long as people don't think that they are uprooting something from the Torah. As long as the rabbis have the end of an excuse, that's what he says. We have a witness, we have hearsay. The people don't understand that it's fine. Why don't you explain to people? Why don't so that two arguments? One, explain to people that this is the process, this is what we're doing. Be honest about the rabbinical process. We're not. The other thing is this: and that's what I think the reason is that we don't use it with the case of present husbands. This is the rabbis don't empathize with the pain of the woman. When the husband is missing, war or a natural disaster, or he went to business overseas and never returned, then the rabbis sort of understand the pain of the woman. Her husband is missing and maybe will never return again. So the only way that we could do is try to find some a little evidence that he's dead, and we rely on that to issue the nullification of divorce, of marriage. But if the husband is here, it's not a big problem. Here's the husband, here's the wife. We'll deal with it. Eventually, he will give her a get, even if it takes 15 years. They don't understand what what the woman is going through. I wrote here a summary. I'll just summarize by saying that to maybe the only way to uh, to bring a cure to the cases that are already there is to make maybe to create a rabbinical court and have the rabbis of that court feel what it is like to be attached to a person that you don't want to be attached to. Imagine if we could recreate that experience of a woman who wants to get divorced but cannot get a divorce, right? I don't know how you would do that. Maybe you would force the judge to live with someone else, right? Bring him into a house with three other roommates who are annoying and abrasive, and that he says, I just want to get rid of them. He says, no, sorry, you can't. And then at a certain point, he said, do you understand what a woman is going through? Or make the Dayan owe the money, and they always call him and say, "What about what you owe us? We need something from you." Uh, it's hard to tell. I don't know how really to bring the Dayanim to empathize and understand the pain of the woman who cannot get a get. But this is the essence of my of what I wanted to present. The solution is out there, and the only problem is the rabbis are reluctant to use it because they are afraid that people will perceive it as bypassing the laws of the Torah. So, in the case of a missing husband, they say our pretext is partial testimony. In case of a present husband, we don't have that. So the women are doomed, unfortunately, to remain in the sense of Aguna because of that political pain. That is what I wanted to present today. Um, we don't have that many people with us on live, so don't know if there are questions or comments, and if not, we can conclude. If you want to, anyone has a question or comment, or if not, I think we could wrap it up and hope and pray for the agunot to be released in one way or another. Maybe a brave bedin will rise and take care of it. So, okay, there's no question. So I would thank everyone for participating, and I'm thinking of those who would watch it later. And if you have questions or comments, you could reach me or Uri Letzedek and learn this thing with more depth. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for teaching us about this very constantly relevant topic and often misunderstood situation that women are unfortunately in all the time. Thank you, everybody who came to join live and people listening after the fact. We have one more class this week with Rav Melchior called The Vision of Justice and Peace, which will be an interview style class. So keep an eye out for that if you guys are interested. And once again, thank you so much for joining us today.